This Dharma talk is very similar to other Dharma talks, and I've even had people say, you keep saying the same thing over and over, all your talks are the same. And I don't disagree. They're very similar. This particular one is titled Anger. You could put anything, any one of the three poisons, or any one of the combinations of kleshas, or disturbances in the consciousness that show up as passion, aggression, and ignorance. But let's do anger. Anger. And then belief, disbelief. Anger. Belief, disbelief. When you have any kind of emotion, but let's say in particular this one of anger, when anger starts to arise, if you add any kind of a story to it at all, I mean, I'm not even talking about a Post-it note size. I'm talking about an itsy bitsy little comment. You perpetuate and validate that emotion, that anger. The same with the other emotions, kleshas. So when we believe something is true, we validate it. Well, if we believe it, then there's usually some kind of propaganda around that. When we disbelieve it, then we're also going the other way. We're trying to get rid of it. We're trying to stop it. We're trying to modify that based on what? More passion, aggression, and ignorance, about desire, wanting things to be different than they are. The second noble truth of the Buddha is things show up, us, we don't like it. We want something else. We want to be different. And this whole path is about being genuine. This doesn't mean accept anything. You'll never hear me say, well, there's that one time. Don't accept. You don't have to accept or reject. Accept, believe. Reject, disbelieve. Don't accept, don't reject. That's a powerful project or dynamic or challenge for someone, you, me, all of us here, who have been raised and conditioned by our culture, by our mom, our dad, our brother, sister, relationships, to think that some things are true and some things are false. Some things are right, some things are wrong. I'm not saying that they're not, but your idea about it is always a projection. You can't see reality. You only see your projection of it. And I'm not saying believe everything I say. I'm not saying disbelieve everything I say. I'm saying don't do anything with it. Sometimes I say don't believe anything I say because I feel like you may be attaching to it too much. And when that happens, then you walk out with concepts about it rather than what it actually is. If you walk out of here not having any idea what I said, that's it. Or not. See how easy that was? So what am I trying to do? I'm endeavoring to bring your awareness as a practitioner of the spiritual path, Buddhist path, the teachings of awakened truth, Buddha, Dharma, awakened truth. Not truth and false, but the truth that is ultimate, that comes out of awakening, realizing that you are not separate from anything. To realize this doesn't mean you're going to get a credential of, oh, I feel so good now, I must be realized. I never have any suffering, I never have any difficulty. I'm always at peace. Horse shit. People who claim that kind of thing have a misunderstanding about the nature of reality, of being a living being, of consciousness itself. There is no, to realization, there's no position. And also, there's no non-position. That's why it's so challenging. And you know what, the other part that's very challenging is that the very thing that I'm talking about, You can disprove, or you can prove. You can go out of here, write down everything I say, and show how this is illogical or unreasonable, or that's not true. So I also say all truth, anything that's true is, or anything is evidence is partial. It's not the whole story of everything. If you see someone mistreat someone else, even in a really intense way, even up to and including taking their life, if you think there's a perpetrator and there's a victim, this is a misunderstanding based on hope and fear. I'm not saying that we shouldn't deal with the person who's taking someone else's life, but to think, to understand, and to project or believe or validate somehow that this person is bad and this other person is not so bad. So the causes and conditions that arise as any given situation are unexplorable. You can't actually see. It's like looking at a tree and following it right down into the roots. If you do that, the roots will be out of the ground and it will die. Tributary streams flowing through the darkness, as it said, mentioned in the, was it Sandokai today? Or is that some other sutra?
It's Hokyozanmai.
Hokyozanmai. Thanks. Basically saying that you aren't going to be able to see, if you approach this from the relative position, it gets confusing because it really looks like some people are to blame. It really looks like somebody did mistreat you, steal your cell phone, or do something disrespectful. But the causes and conditions that arise that provide us with any given situation in terms of praise and blame, getting credit, getting blame or faulted for something, you can't actually see the big picture. You can't see it. That's why they call it a big picture. It's infinite. You can't measure it. But it trips us up because we are living in a world that our culture, society, mom and dad, family, brothers, sisters, are always in the position of looking for who's correct, who's incorrect, who's right, who's wrong. And you can find that kind of information, and you can get your other people around you to agree or disagree, to reinforce your opinion. But what I'm talking about, what I'm emphasizing, is how important it is to strengthen the awareness and not try to find out who's right, who's wrong, or if my spiritual path is getting anywhere. If you're interested in a spiritual path getting somewhere, this is called a mundane path. This is called, my teacher, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, talked about Buddha Dharma, or awakened truth without credentials. This means no proof. If you have proof, it's a relative situation. We're not saying that if you were to meditate for weeks, months, years, that you wouldn't become more settled, more peaceful. Just the natural thing of sitting down and not doing much is going to slow things down. You'll be less speedy. Of course, there's some of that happening. And on the spiritual path, you may notice some of that, but the important thing is not to do much with it. Don't do the math. Don't add it up. As soon as we start doing the math, the awareness starts to shut down and looks for results. Or possibly, if it goes the other direction, looks for failure. This isn't working. I've got to find another meditation technique. I have to find another teacher, another Sangha. And I'm not saying you shouldn't. Maybe you should. So going back to the topic, when anger arises, comes up, possibly triggered by something, but it's still your anger. Even if it's triggered by someone, something, somebody does something, and to offend you, and your anger, your dissatisfaction gets triggered. But if through the awareness practice, you'll notice that that's actually your feelings. No one got a bucket of feelings and poured them into you. There may have been a trigger there. That's why it's so difficult, because it looks like cause and effect should be pointed out and blamed. Should be pointed out and we just need to fix this. If you're having an intense feeling, we can use anger, we could use any kind of feeling, jealousy. And you add anything to it through trying to stop it, through trying to explain why it's happening, through trying to, maybe it's so difficult that you just want to turn away and distract yourself into something else, ignorance. Anytime we do anything with what is occurring, this is how it looks. We shut down in some way, we turn away, we use the anger to cover up, or we use the explanation or description of the anger. So what's being recommended here? I say, find the anger when it comes up. Ah. Of course, you're not doing this. You're probably trying to hide it, but it's probably going to find your vocal cords. It's going to find your fist. Sorry about that. I only hit myself. But sometimes it feels that way, doesn't it? It feels like I want to have some satisfaction here out of this. Kind of a street level of an idea. So when that arises, this is your opportunity as a meditator, as someone who is prioritizing the awareness first, prioritizing what is the space in which things occur. This is occurring, you could say, moving pretty slow, but it's occurring in space. The space in which things occur is not separate from Buddha Dharma. It's like, this is quite often why the metaphor of the sky is used for Tathagata, or awakened truth, or emptiness. And the clouds are like the thoughts and emotions and feelings and content coming and going, coming and going. So as a meditator, as someone who is stretching, emphasizing, encouraging, whatever word you want to use, to the awareness of what is happening, the awareness itself, the space, the spaciousness. Sometimes I use the example of some people, we all know them, maybe it's you, live in a broom closet. They have this much space, that's it. They don't have any more. And they have their computer, their cell phone, their checkbook, and all of their lists of things they need to do or not do. Making fun of that, yes. But then there are also those who live in an open dimension, who live more like living in an open field, where things are happening there, but there's lots of space around everything. There's lots of room for things to come and go. And what is so powerful about that is the openness. And you can begin to see that openness if you take the anger or the intense feeling or emotion that has been happening, that has been triggered by an apparent other event. If you take that as a practice to be able to see the space around the emotion, it doesn't feel like it's very spacious. Usually anger feels very claustrophobic, especially if you're working with it to try to stop it. If you're working with trying to figure out who caused that, who's doing it, why am I feeling this way? Or actually, you're already on the way to blaming. You already have your finger, you have these fingers back, and you're already pointing. And I would say it this way, we're missing the opportunity to see deeply into what this is, this anger, this dissatisfaction, the second noble truth of the Buddha, wanting things to be different than they are. This is your opportunity through your practice to, maybe you'll see out of the corner of your awareness, you'll see that yes, this was the trigger, this woman, this man, this situation, this is the trigger, but look at this feeling, look at this intense feeling of wanting warfare, wanting some kind of satisfaction out of it, wanting to do something with it. And then look at the texture of that. Texture. Texture, you can't have texture unless you have space. If you have a carpet and you have nap and then there's space between the little fibers, this is called texture. If there's no texture, then it's like what? Linoleum, yes. It's just flat and you can't see into it, and it's kind of mirror-like, and it doesn't seem like you're going to get anywhere with it. So not to believe, think it's true, grasp at it, pull at it, explain it, start writing books about it. Not to disbelieve, reject it, push it away, try to tamp it down, cover it up with something. But of course, when you start to get rid of it or something through some kind of aggression against the aggression, sometimes Trungpa Rinpoche called it double negativity. First negativity is bad enough. That's difficult enough. And what's being said through the awareness practice, just be with it. Be with the original negativity. Get to know yourself. Get to know how your negativity works. Just stay with that rather than add the negativity of it's their fault or I shouldn't have. As soon as you say I shouldn't have, you've actually left the texture of the very emotion that you're referring to. Don't do it. There isn't anyone. But when you say I should not have, you are reinforcing an imaginary being called me, I. It's not that there isn't something happening there, but it is not the way that you think it is. It is, I like to use the words discontinuous. Identity is there, that's why it's so damn tricky. But it's discontinuous. It will not hold still for a minute. With some people, especially those of you born in mutable signs, sorry. I'm not really sorry. I enjoyed it. That was fun. So, but you know, it's like here and then, oh, maybe it's over there, and oh, maybe it's over here, and maybe it's over there. You know, and then other people might actually try to find some polarity and just clamp down on the polarity in order to have an artificial reference point, security. Sometimes, if it's carried on and on, it's called an opinion. So when I say, don't believe, don't disbelieve, I know you can't stop doing that. If I can't, probably you can't. I can't. But by saying that, it brings the awareness to the way we attach and the way we detach, the way we attach. You actually see the story about it is kind of secondary, or, three seats back in the bus of awareness. The awareness is right here driving the bus with nowhere to go, no lanes, no markers, no nothing. This is called the spiritual path. If there are lanes and markers and designations about where to turn and what the speed limit is, this is the mundane path. It's just a way of talking about relative truth and absolute truth, which is impossible to talk about. Bailey.
I noticed that if a negative emotion arises, there's often a lot of discourse about it. So trying to validate it or trying to invalidate it. Is seeing the texture of all of that extra stuff any different than seeing the texture of the original negativity?
Good question. So that tells you about the original negativity. If you start to see the texture in the story, then that's actually the texture that of the original negativity contaminating the story. You follow me? The original negativity has left, the texture of it has left and is contaminating the story. Or you could say that the story is contaminating the texture. When I'm just using the word contaminated as a way of saying that because nothing is separate, but is separated, because nothing is fundamentally separate, but relative truth shows us that the very thing that we say is not separate has separations. So again, we come back to what? The fundamental truth that's being taught in especially all of the non-theistic traditions of Advaita, or non-dual, not two. And so Those two things are, if you see them, are not separate from each other. So it's a good question. I would say, in terms of your sitting practice, continue to investigate that. And don't push it down, don't fluff it up, and don't look away from it. And if it feels like you're not making any progress, you're doing it correctly. You might be miserable, I'll be delighted.
What do you mean investigate?
So look, witness, view what it fundamentally is. So if I were to use these hand and arm signals again, here's the original anger coming up. And instead of, quite often what happens, instead of investigating the anger, which will not give you any feedback, it will not give you a feeling of investigating, it would just be anger. It would just be the intense feeling of that anger. And what you will notice about it is that nothing lasts. But what often people will actually look at their idea about the anger, which is tied up with stories about it, all kinds of separations from it, that we separate ourselves out from the original negativity. And so when I say investigate, I'm saying see the story, and the same thing that Bailey is asking about, see that some of that original negativity is contaminating or stuck to the story. Then that kind of seduces us into staying with the story. Well, he said that. Well, he did that. Well, I wouldn't feel this way if it weren't for that. You know, little bitty discursive thoughts, little conversations we have with ourselves. And it's not, this is the amazing thing, it's not about stopping that. It's not about, there's a misunderstanding, it's not about manipulating anything. It's not about shutting anything down, ramping anything up, shutting anything off. It's about, to use the W word, witness. It's about a witness quality. But there's no witness there. So to investigate would be to, when the anger arises, do you have anger? No. So when that comes up, I'm not saying abandon the story that wants to track it or explain it. I don't say push it away. Don't take the aggression and turn it away so that you can investigate. I'm saying just first thought, best thought. Just investigate. And if, as I said, I think before, if it doesn't feel like you're getting anywhere, but you're still feeling the anger, probably. When I say correctly, I'm just saying you're probably it's just anger and awareness, anger arising in the awareness. Eventually what occurs, if you want to call it an occurrence, is the anger and the awareness, or the space and that which arises in the space, are no longer separate. This is called perception only, or mind only. Bailey?
Could investigating the stories or the extra stuff be a way of distracting ourselves from looking at the original negativity?
Could be, yeah.
So how do we investigate the original negativity without pushing away the extra?
But by seeing that you're pushing it. And you don't have to stop. This is the kind of the conundrum. You don't have to modify what you're doing. You just need to see it. It's an awareness practice. Awareness is king. Awareness is queen. Awareness, space. And we emphasize that because that is the path quality of this, is to open up the space. And eventually there it is resolved, you want to call it a resolution, and not two. There's not two things anywhere. And it's a realization, and it's powerful. It's, what is that word they use sometimes? Mind-blowing? Yeah, mind-blowing. Yes?
Is the original negativity of the anger, is that a physical sensation to witness?
It could be. You know, you probably all notice that when we have intense emotions of any kind, there's a feeling quality, a physical quality to it, and then there's a mental thing, and quite often when you're looking at the texture, you can't tell the difference between whether it's a physical thing or a mental thing. That's when it's really showing up that mind and body are not separate. But ego, or hope and fear, separates it all the time. Ego is trying to find some kind of validation for being real, that there's somebody here who's actually suffering, somebody here who's actually been hurt somebody here who can live or die or succeed or fail, the 8 worldly dharmas. So this is why awareness practice is so powerful. But and this is the, if you want to call it bad news, you have to do a buttload of it. You have to do so much of it. You've noticed that, haven't you, after doing it for 30 years? But there's no way to say, well, you can do it 5 years, you can do it 18 years, you can do it. It depends on what you're doing. I can see somebody coming in here and sitting on their cushion day after day after day. But if they don't ever talk to me about what they're doing, then there's not much I can do. It might be fine to just sit there. If they were to talk to me about it, maybe I might change what they're doing. Maybe I might not have them do shikantaza. Maybe I might have them do more of a stabilization practice.
What can be done when intense negativity arises in conversation with someone and it seems to take over?
Oh, yeah. So you've probably heard this many times before. I'll say it again. Don't forget gravity. One of the things, just stay embodied rather than, because it's so easy if there's any kind of difficulty or, between two people, you're trying to have a conversation and suddenly someone is functioning in a way that's starting to trigger anger that has been uninvestigated. If you've investigated the anger, pretty difficult for anybody to upset you. Now, if you actually looked at this, if you know who this is, I'm not saying there's not anger there and that it won't be triggered, but it doesn't happen to a person. It doesn't happen to an identity. It just is just anger. It's called, in the Tibetan tradition, it is called rangjung, or self-existing. It's how do you explain something like that? It's very difficult. The Tibetans have tried. Everyone has tried. I'm trying. So I would say, don't forget gravity. At the same time, don't forget your other senses. Quite often, if we get terrified or upset or angered, we immediately abandon the first 5 sense fields and just go into the mind about how we've been mistreated. Have little conversations about they can't do this, or why is he doing this? Why are they acting like this? What have I done to deserve this? I don't deserve this. That's another one. And those all are things that keep you from seeing the original negativity. More? Yeah. And so it's a practice. You're talking to someone. This is why I have people who are, especially people in a relationship, actually practice sitting down, looking at each other. Spend some time, sit down, look at each other, and reconnect with if it's your mate, reconnect with your original inspiration to even be together. It will happen. You don't even have to do anything. Just sit and look in someone you love. Sit and look at their eyes for 5 or 10 minutes, and you're right back home again, because the presence, the authentic presence of a human being, is powerful. It's happening when you face the wall all the time, but when you face another being and look in their eyes, we've all done that. You know what that's like. It's a good practice for especially people who are having some difficulty with communication, trying to understand where the other person's coming from, what they're up to, why you're perceiving them as being threatening or angry or obstructive or causing you difficulty.
You titled the talk anger, belief, disbelief. Mm-hmm. So, or any negative feeling, what, is that something that we should contemplate?
You could. So you have anger, and then we believe it in the sense that we believe that's it's not that doesn't have a reality to it, but it's not fundamentally real. It's not fundamentally something that belief and disbelief just don't work in that area. And if you are working with that kind of situation, then usually there's a lot of stories that tag along with it and attach themselves to the emotion. Little stories that we abandon the original feeling. In other words, we stopped inspecting the feeling and we opt for the story about it. You can notice how if you're angry, So if you talk to someone about it, you'll immediately leave the anger and go right into some kind of some discursive thought or some explanation about it. The other one is you feel angry and you say, I shouldn't feel that way. It's just, I shouldn't feel that way. I have to stop feeling that. Trying to get out of that.
So if nothing lasts, then how do we stay with the anger?
So staying with it is to see the texture of it, but don't engage or destroy or eliminate or ignore any stories that arise around that. So just stay with it. And it won't last. It only lasts if it's fueled by pushing, pulling, or turning away, it seems. But then to talk about anger as just a blanket situation, someone else, you might have different combinations of emotions and feelings that could show up in other ways. But we need to start somewhere, so let's start with the awareness practice. What we're doing is we sit down, find out what you can control, which is your body. You can't control the mind. Somebody here control their mind? Just making sure every now and then you run into one of those people. So you sit down, you find what you can, and in this tradition you hold your body still, because the body and mind are not separate. So if you hold the body still and observe, the mind tends to take the shape of the body. It's just a way of talking about it. It tends to slow down and take a more stable situation, so you can see more clearly what is happening. Not always. There's no guarantee. You may have to go through different kinds of passages that don't feel stable at all. And that might even cause you to say, I must be doing this wrong, or shikantaza doesn't work for me, or I need to do some other kind of practice. I mean, there's just so many directions that you can go with it. So even though it might appear like I'm trying to sell you on something, my fundamental message, besides train your mind, is trust yourself. And I don't mean believe your thoughts. You can't really trust yourself until you see what that is about, until you see that who you actually are is more like space than it is like a series of ideas, thought patterns, thinking. That's extra. Even though there's a witnessing, a viewing, a seeing quality happening constantly through all the six sense fields, including the mind, we opt for the ideas that arise, the thinking, feelings, emotions, or the conditioning that comes out of there. And we tend to attach to it. More questions would be good if you have them. Yes, David.
When you say the visual perception of texture, is there also a sound perception, or is that visual through the sound?
It could be.
For instance, if you have anger and it starts out like, the rhythm is more like ba 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 ba. It starts to slow down and there's space, and then it speeds up ba ba ba, and then you kind of catch it, and there's space again. And
I got it. What's your question?
so, what is is that the texture you're talking about also, or is it just visual?
Oh, I think it's functioning very much like that. Even though the senses look very discrete and separate from each other, they're overlapping all the time. So, but you have to actually bring the awareness to that. You have to bring it there and see it. And it might look like this old man is sitting up here confident and has ideas and is telling you things. This is a misunderstanding of what you're looking at.
It's not confidence, what is it?
It isn't anything at all. It might look like confidence, but it's not.
earlier you said everything is a projection
Yes,
and that we can't really see reality.
that's right.
So then how can we see what is true?
So it seems to come from continually returning to the difficulty in your particular situation, returning to it. And the way we do it in this tradition is sit down in front of a wall. Looks kind of like a foolish thing to do. And a lot of times people have said, oh, you're going to turn into a vegetable. Misunderstanding of thinking in the mind altogether. So I think it's just a matter of insisting and being sincere and wanting to do it. If I could give you awakening or realization, then I would do that. But you have to do it yourself. You have to see it yourself. And if you do, you probably walk out of here and never come back. So it just seems that it's necessary to just insist on it.
So if something arises that looks like what we might call a truth, or something that is true, how can we not believe or disbelieve that?
I don't know.
But is that what you're saying also? If something arises that looks true,
This is how it looks. If you think it's true, this is what you're looking at. You're looking at a preconception. More? Any questions around that? It's really, yes.
I'm needing clarification around
Yes.
the structure and function of giving an emotion or a feeling texture, or
Yes.
a sense texture. What
We-
is the purpose of that, and
The-
what does it do?
Yeah, the emotion already has texture. So here's, use this. Are you visual or are you auditory or what's your
Oh,
favorite?
probably more auditory.
Okay, so explain it to her, will you? Let me try to do it, okay? So here's the texture. The texture means there's space between things. Otherwise you've got, like I said, linoleum. It doesn't mean that linoleum on a microscopic level would have texture also. But the texture is just the kind of the personality or the energy quality of the emotion or the feeling or the anger or whatever. And then so rather than giving it texture, it already has texture. What we do is when we see that or feel that because it's so difficult or painful or scary or whatever you want to come up with, we tend to cover it up, the texture we need to be observing, with our ideas, our thoughts, our opinions, our beliefs, our interpretations, our validations, we just cover it up. And what's being said is through the sitting practice of meditation, through shikantaza, through awareness practice, I'm saying slowly, over time, see first. You can't just remove it because you can't remove what you don't see. So you first have to see that it is a projection on top of what you're trying to understand. So continuing to look at that, it eventually will dissolve, or you'll be able to see through it. It'll become transparent. Thinking becomes transparent. You start to see deeply, deeply into your consciousness in a way that's completely personal and is yours. So is that helpful or?
I think so.
So we're looking. Let me say it very literally and bluntly. We're almost all the time, probably all the time, we're looking at our preconceptions rather than what's there. If you see what's there, I put it as simply as I can. If you see what's there, you see no separation. You actually see yourself, and you are a Buddha. Buddhas and sentient beings are not separate. Those who are deluded, as Dogen said in the 13th century, those who are deluded about the nature of enlightenment or awakening are sentient beings. And those who are clear or have an understanding of the nature of delusion are Buddhas. And Buddhas and sentient beings are not two. You've heard that many times.
Yes. So this also applies to, or could also apply to desirable and pleasurable feelings?
All.
Okay, I guess I got really polarized on anger and realized
Yeah.
with my personal constitution and stuff I struggle with, a lot of my feelings have the
Yeah.
same texture, whether it's desirable or not. I respond with a very specific painful texture,
Yeah.
so that helps
Yeah.
expand that.
Yeah, so I would say, and everyone is different, and I teach to the person. I don't teach to, I'm doing my best with every time I look at a different person, because I know you all at least a little bit, my whole dynamic starts to change. It's very, very difficult. It was early on, it was very difficult for me to sit in front of a large group of people. And it's no longer difficult for me to do that because there's just the people. So when I see you actually show me what you need to hear, and that's what you're doing too. Yes.
This is the way I'm grappling with this, but you mentioned that, would you say that truth is something that as soon as we can experience it, we can see it, but as soon as we say that's truth, we project then onto it, and that becomes our projection, and we
Something,
kind of lose.
I think something like you
lose
could
the
talk
original
about.
sense.
You could talk about it that way. What you're doing is you're because you want a reference point, you or anyone else wants a reference point. We separate ourselves through I like that, or we separate ourselves through I don't like that, or we separate ourselves through I don't give a shit about that. I don't care. Who cares? Kind of a. It's interesting, and you might think that doesn't show up too much, but we're really doing quite a bit of that. It's just disregarding. Anytime you're looking at anything, like I'm looking at you, I'm ignoring everything else. And anytime you're focused on any one thing, everything else falls into the background. So one who is not focused on anything is aware. There's anything they're not aware of. You could say it. I'm saying it conceptually because I can't talk without using words, even though they're what do they call that? What do they call words?
I was thinking of miming.
Okay, I'll try that. Okay, ask me a question and I'll give you the answer in miming. Oh, you got to mime the question.
Are all projections then concepts?
Sign language.
How was that? Goofy. Goofy. Yes. It seems that would be a way of working with it. We don't know exactly what they are. We don't know. We don't really know how can it be said? We know what things do. We know what they do. But we know what they do, but we don't know really what they are. We don't know fundamentally what anything is. It's just bizarre. It's this is how it begins to look. If someone is beginning to see through the practice, beginning to see emptiness, actually beginning to see shunyata or the Tathagata Garbha or whatever fancy word you want to, or the truth. It's bizarre because it doesn't fit with our preconceptions of it. People who do drugs, ayahuasca or lysergic acid, diethylamide, all kinds of, even some forms of marijuana are extremely powerful. Psilocybin, we talked about that earlier. So it changes what you're seeing, so you get a flash on it there. But the difficulty was with all of that; those are experiential. I'll repeat that. All of those are experiential. Realization is not an experience. This is an experience. Where is it now? Gone. It's gone. But realization isn't an occurrence. It is something that was always there, and you looked at what I keep talking about over and over again. Look at the projections. Look at what is laminating over what it is that you're feeling. The passion, aggression, ignorance show up, and we put stuff on top of it and settle for the idea about it. The blaming of someone, the blaming of ourselves, the little mini Post-it notes all over everything that explain what we're feeling. It's very difficult to just fundamentally ache hurt without some kind of an explanation for it. It's just the nature of samsara. Life is suffering that causes craving, desire, wanting things to be different than they are. The goal is cessation, and the path is Shila Samadhi and Prajna, or discipline, Samadhi, or see this, and then Prajna, see what is actually true yourself. Actually see it yourself, so it's yours. It's so personal. It's so personal you know it, you don't really question that. You know it, but you also don't know how to really tell anybody else about it. Should I mime some more? Further questions? We have a little bit of time left. Yes.
So sometimes very intense things can happen, and the next week it's fine. It's like nothing happened, or it's over.
Yeah.
And other things, maybe years and years ago, are still tender. And if something comes close, it's like everything comes back.
Yeah.
Is there a way to work with that?
Yeah.
It's different?
That's a very good description of and the way I would say that probably, I'm just speculating, only you would really know, probably you and others have, in your situation, probably found a way to ignore that or put it under, it's called repression or something. I don't know if it's like exactly a repression. Found a way to kind of set that off to one side or ignore that in such a way that as long as nothing is happening out here, it's just kind of hanging out in storage. The Yogacara tradition calls that the eighth consciousness, or the Alevijnana, which something happens here, and that message is always going up and down through all the eight sense consciousnesses, or the five sense consciousnesses, the thinking consciousness, the seventh consciousness, and then the eighth, which is the storehouse. So it seems like that's, probably isn't anything like that, but we need some kind of a concept. So I would say the way we work with that is to, anytime anything arises, less is better. Just, it's like anytime you're in a sitting situation, sitting meditation, or if you're interacting with others and you feel something start to come to the surface because of a trigger somewhere, kind of treat what is happening like clouds or like fish in a pond, and don't add anything to them. Just see that there's something moving. You don't know what it is yet. If you know what it is too soon, then it gets identified, and then all of what could have been explored as a texture of that, you could actually release it. I often say, if you're upset by what's happening out in the world, which, who isn't? It's a mess, there's a big mess. Be careful before you go out and, get challenged and go out with some kind of a cause, that you're not taking your own unexamined warfare or aggression out in the world and kind of adding to the confusion, adding more warfare to it, because war against war is just more war, even though the one war may be explained and have a great philosophy behind it. So similar kind of thing seems to be necessary to actually examine that, whether it's buried or whatever it is, because eventually something will trigger that. Okay, yes.
When that
Michael
is triggered, how to get rid of it? That anger, pain, suffering. How do you examine it and let it go?
Letting go is it's a misunderstanding. A lot of people use that. They'll even lecture other people. Just let it go. Just be with all things. Just be in the present. Live in the now. And this is to someone who is suffering deeply. This is irritating to hear that. Just be in the now. Be here now. It just makes you more pissed off. So I would say what needs to be done, it seems, according to the way it looks over here, having done some of this kind of work, is whatever happens, don't agree, don't disagree, and don't look away. So you're just awareness. The awareness is not being laminated or clouded over by agreeing with it. The awareness is not being clouded over by letting it go or getting rid of it. I'll just let go of that or get rid of that. And the awareness is not being clouded over by some kind of distraction into something else, actually taking your awareness away from it because it's uncomfortable to look at. So trying to get rid of it is that's what happens with the self-centeredness, with our ego. We even lecture ourselves, I gotta stop doing this. I gotta get rid of this. I can't continue to feel this way. And actually you perpetuate the situation. It just comes, it might turn away for a little bit, but then it'll show right back up again. It's very circular. So, more? Brittany?
Is part of realization seeing that there's space for everything?
I think that would be a simple way of putting it. Just see there's lots of room. Lots of room. And to see that is to see the singularity of individual things and see the multiplicity at the same time, and not necessarily differentiate between those. Like the chant in English we did Sokuzan in the 9th century, I think it was, this morning, where he talks about the equality of sameness and difference. The actual title of the sutra, of the poem, is Sandokai. Equality, if we just reflect on that, the equality, there's difference and there's sameness, and they're equal. It's a relative way of talking about the absolute, or talking about non-dual. Non-dual awareness is awareness that doesn't grasp a self, doesn't grasp an other, and just sees not two. It also doesn't see oneness, because if it sees oneness, then there's something seeing the oneness, which we're right back to two again. That's why there's no credit. There's no proof of anything. No proof. Sorry. Alrighty then. Any further questions before we close? Very good, thank you.